December 11th of the year 220 AD. This is a drawing of Emperor Xian of the Han Dynasty. He was the last ruler of the Eastern Han because on this day he was forced to abdicate his throne by Xiao Pi, who was the son of Zhao Zhao. And these are central characters in the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, classic Chinese novel, which itself is a novelization of a very detailed historical document on the Three Kingdoms period of Chinese history. December 11th, 361 AD, Emperor Julian, otherwise known as Julian the Apostate, enters the city of Constantinople in the Roman Empire as the newly crowned Roman emperor. And he's known as the Apostate because he's known for rejecting Christianity in favor of Greek tradition. This is, of course, a few decades after Emperor Constantine had his revelation and decriminalized Christianity in the empire. Julian had a short reign, however, because the 4th century was, boy howdy, a wild time for Rome. His reign lasted only 2 years. December 11th, 969 AD. This is Byzantine Emperor Nikephoros II Phocas, and on this day he was assassinated by his wife Theophano. His reign lasted about 6 years, during which time he reconquered the islands of Cyprus and Crete, and also earned himself the title Pale Death of the Saracens. Later on he was canonized a saint in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, and his feast day, of course, is on the day of his death, December 11th. December 11th, 1198 AD. This is the date of death for Ibn Rushd, otherwise known as Averroes. He lived in Spain before the Reconquista. He lived during the tail end of the Islamic Golden Age. That was an explosion in education and knowledge, resulting from increased communication and cultural homogeneity, stretching all the way from Central Asia across North Africa and into Spain. This guy is best known for his commentaries on Aristotle, but he also did some work in astronomy. December 11th, 1230, the Treaty of Benavente. This was part of medieval Spanish history. This treaty was between two northern Spanish kingdoms, those being Castile and Leon, and the monarchs of Leon at the time signed a treaty abdicating their throne and vassalizing their lands to the King of Castile, the King of Castile being Ferdinand III. And with that, two kingdoms are merged into one. This was, of course, in the midst of the Reconquista, and that was a 500-year series of wars between the Christian Spaniards in the north and the Muslim Moors who had ages ago invaded from North Africa. Over the course of centuries, the Christians gradually pushed the Muslims out of Spain, and by the time of Columbus, it would be a Catholic kingdom. December 11th, 1241 AD, this is the date of death for Ogadai Khan. This is one of the sons of the famous Genghis Khan. That's the famous conqueror who started the Mongol invasion of the world. Speaking of reasons that the Islamic Golden Age ended, this guy continued his father's work, stretching the Mongol Empire all the way from East Asia, taking over the entire Silk Road and expanding into Northern Europe. December 11th, 1640, the Root and Branch Petition. This was a petition signed by 15,000 people of London and presented to the government by a crowd of 1,500 people, asking the Long Parliament to abolish episcopacy from all its roots and branches. Episcopacy being bishops. They did not want official church bishops serving on pretty much any level of government. December 11th, 1675, the Antonio de Vella Expedition. This is an expedition by Spain exploring what is now modern-day Chile, and the purpose for this expedition was more than just to map out land. They were suspicious that the English and the British Empire already had a presence in the area, and they wanted to confirm or deny the presence of English military forts. Well, on this day, the group of over 200 men reached San Rafael Lake. December 11th, 1688, the Glorious Revolution in England. This portrait is James II, King James Stuart. If the name Stuart sounds familiar, this is the grandfather of Charles Stuart, otherwise known as Bonnie Prince Charlie, the Catholic monarch, or at least attempted monarch, who tried to claim his ancestral right to rule both England and Scotland. Well, Bonnie Prince Charlie's grandfather, James Stuart, well, the Glorious Revolution was when this family got deposed. And December 11th of 88 was when the King of England, James Stuart II, tossed the Great Seal of the nation into the river in London. This is a symbolic gesture because the Great Seal is the king's stamp of approval for legislation, and the king himself discarding such an important item is a declaration that the nation has fallen. And in the coming decades, future members of the Stuart family would exploit Scottish grievances against the English rulers in more than one attempt to retake the throne by conquest. December 11th, 1792, the French Revolution. This portrait is King Louis XVI of France. And on this day, he would be put in trial in Paris for the crime of treason. 1 month and 10 days later, the following month, the following year, King Louis would be executed by guillotine at the age of 38. December 11th, 1815, the United States Senate creates a Select Committee on Finance that is the predecessor to the same Committee on Finance that's in the Senate today. And also on this day, the United States establishes a uniform national currency. There was a time before the 1787 Constitution when each of the states in the Union were allowed to issue their own currencies to fill the gap left when the British left the continent, in a confusing way to say the least. But now, within living memory of that, the nation has one currency, the US dollar. December 11th, 1816. On this day, Indiana becomes the 19th state in the Union. After the Revolution, the Americans no longer had to obey treaty lines. They were open to settle further and further west. And on top of this, a little over a decade before this, the Louisiana Purchase happened. We purchased thousands of miles of new land, and we sent Lewis and Clark to explore all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And these were decades when a lot of the Midwest states were becoming states. Some of these states were added so fast that a lot of the county and municipal maps are set out on a grid. If you're in an East Coast state, you're probably used to seeing the shape of counties on a map being a little cattywampus because they probably follow a river or another natural boundary. But nope, in some of the Midwest states, it is a perfect square. December 11th, 1862, the Battle of Fredericksburg begins in the Civil War. General Ambrose Burnside of the Union Army advanced across a river to attack the Confederate Army under General Lee at Fredericksburg, Virginia. This was still in the first half of the war, and this is after General Burnside replaced McClellan. McClellan having been removed from supreme command of the Union Army by Lincoln because he was absolutely indecisive and ineffective. The Union on the eastern front of the war, in the beginning, they pretty much floundered. In the western states, the Union did pretty well. The Anaconda Plan did actually succeed in the end. And even a year after this, when Sherman was doing his march to sea, the Union was able to get victories in the Deep South as well. However, in Virginia, General Lee was able to give the Army of the Potomac a run for its money right up until the end. December 11th, 1868, the Battle of Ave. This was part of the Paraguayan War in South America, which lasted from 1864 to 1870. This one was known as the deadliest war in South American history, and that includes the whole Simón Bolívar Gran Colombia thing. The nation of Paraguay was fighting by itself against a triple alliance of Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. And sometimes, with these wars of grand alliances, these little nations standing by themselves get lucky. Sometimes we get a General Napoleon who can defeat several nations' armies in battle successively, one after the other. This is not one of those times. Paraguay was defeated at this Battle of Ave near the Ave River, and ultimately they would go on to lose the war 2 years later. December 11th, 1872, this is the date of death for King Kamehameha V. Yes, you heard that name right. One of the last few monarchs of Hawaii. He reigned during the final century before the American imperialists got their mitts on the island chain. From the information we have, he was regarded as a good and diligent ruler. During his time, he received visits from the American author Mark Twain, Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh, son of Queen Victoria, as well as Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany. December 11th, 1880, this is the date of death for Oliver Winchester, best known for his company Winchester Repeating Rifles. He was also lieutenant governor, that is second in command to the governor of the state of Connecticut, for a brief time following the Civil War. Born in Boston, died in New Haven, he lived in a very different time in New England. In the time of Mark Twain, looking at what New England was then and what it is now, it's a pretty sad transition to think about, honestly. December 11th, 1899, the Battle of Magersfontein in the Second Boer War. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. In this battle, a British force was going to relieve a siege at a place called Kimberley. They were intercepted by a large group of Boers, and in this battle, the smaller force defeated the larger force. The Boers defeated the British. This was because the British failed to do proper scouting, and the British commander made an incorrect assumption about where the Boers would dig in for defense. And because of that, the British, despite having a larger force, ended up with more casualties at the end of the day. December 11th, 1901, this photograph is Guglielmo Marconi. And this man, with a very Italian name, was the first person to transmit a transatlantic radio signal. He sent this from Cornwall in England to Newfoundland, Canada. The distance of this transmission was about 2,200 miles, or 3,500 kilometers. The man was 27 years old at the time he did this. December 11th, 1905, a workers' uprising in the city of Kiev results in the formation of the Shuliavka Republic, an extremely short-lived state that only lasted about 4 days. I wonder if that's a record. Now, this city was part of the Russian Empire at the time. This was before the Bolshevik Revolution. And this uprising was a sign of the times in a lot of ways. The first 2 decades of the 20th century were really the high point for communist sympathy and workers' rights, globally, not just in Europe. But in the Russian Empire specifically, Tsar Nicholas II, who was the reigning Tsar at the time, was seen as a weak and ineffective ruler. Reason number 987 would be because he allowed an uprising such as this one to get this far. And who among us has read our history books? A little more than a decade later, the entire Tsar's family would be killed, the entire government of Imperial Russia would be overthrown, replaced by an interim government, and then a second revolution, and then the Bolshevik government, which became the USSR. December 11th, 1907, here is a picture of the Parliament building in New Zealand. This is the new Parliament building. What happened to the old one? It was destroyed by a fire in 1907. The fire started around 2 a.m., so luckily not many people were put at risk. The night watchman said he heard what sounded like rain on the roof, but when he went to investigate, he found out that was not the case. December 11th, 1913, this is Leonardo da Vinci's painting The Mona Lisa. And did you know that for about 2 years it was stolen from the Louvre Art Museum in Paris? People did not know where it was. But on this date, December 11th, it was found in the home of Vincenzo Perugia in Italy. The thief was arrested and the painting was returned to the museum. December 11th, 1917, this is Edmund Allenby again. If you remember from yesterday's This Day in History, he was a British military commander tasked with occupying land in the Levant during World War I. Yesterday, his military force reached Jerusalem, and on this day, he entered the city and declared martial law. December 11th, 1920, the burning of Cork, Ireland. In retaliation for an IRA bombing, members of the British military loot and burn inside the Irish city of Cork. Businesses were burned and residents reported being shot at. And throughout most of the 20th century, Irish and English relations would not be much improved. December 11th, 1934, Bill Wilson. Are you a friend of Bill? On this day, he took his very last sip of alcohol and dedicated the rest of his life to a support group to help others overcome their addictions. That group is known as Alcoholics Anonymous. December 11th, 1937, the League of Nations. Have I ever mentioned my thoughts on post-national organizations? Hi, hello. I think that very often they are useless, and more often they are less than useless. On this day in 1937, Italy leaves the League of Nations. This is part of the lead-up to World War II, also part of the events surrounding Italy's involvement in Ethiopia. December 11th, 1941, while several world governments were distracted with various declarations of war, the Battle of Wake Island was still going on. Wake Island was a U.S. territory. It was one of multiple locations that were hit simultaneously on the morning of December 11th. Fun fact, though, this is across the international dateline, so while the attack did happen at the same time as Pearl Harbor, it's technically December 8th when it happened here and December 7th at Pearl Harbor. Wake Island gave the Japanese a little bit of a challenge, though. This battle lasted 2 whole weeks, and on December 11th, the first Japanese naval vessel was sunk at Wake Island. December 11th, 1941, this is less than a week following Pearl Harbor, the day which will live in infamy. Less than a week after the United States declared war on Japan, both Germany and Italy on the same day declare war on the United States. And after this, on the very same day, the U.S. declares war on Germany and Italy in retaliation. And thus, America had declared war against all 3 of the Axis powers. The U.S. was officially and fully in World War II. December 11th, 1941. As if there weren't enough declarations of war going around between Italy, Germany, and the U.S., on the same day, the nation of Poland, or rather the government of Poland in exile, because at this point Poland was under occupation, well, this day is when they declare war on Japan, further solidifying the 3-nation Axis alliance, and helping the war take shape as one with both a European and a Pacific theater. December 11th, 1946, the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, or UNICEF, is established. Surely this whole UN thing will go better than the League of Nations thing, right? Right? December 11th, 1962, this is Arthur Lucas. Originally from the state of Georgia, he became the last person to be executed in Canada. He was convicted of killing a 44-year-old drug dealer and police informant, along with said drug dealer's 20-year-old common-law wife. Those murders happened in November of the previous year, and he was executed 13 months later. December 11th, 1964, this iconic face is, of course, Che Guevara. He is one of the most well-known communists and a major figure of the Cuban Revolution. He did do some government work in Cuba following the Castro takeover. And on this day, he gave a speech to the UN General Assembly. December 11th, 1972, Apollo 17 becomes the final Apollo mission and the most recent American expedition to land on the moon. This mission lasted around 12.5 days. It included 3 astronauts, 5 mice, and one of the people that went up was a professional geologist. December 11th, 1978, the Lufthansa heist. Lufthansa, of course, being the name of an airline. This was a robbery committed at JFK International Airport in New York City. The robbery stole $5 million cash and over $800,000 worth of jewelry. And that is in 1978 money. Now, officially, no one has been convicted of this heist. Officially, we don't know who did it. Allegedly, there is a man named James Burke, who is allegedly connected to one of New York's big crime families. He was allegedly the mastermind of this, and allegedly took out a bunch of his co-conspirators to keep them from talking. December 11th, 1981, the El Mozote massacre in El Salvador. This was during their civil war there. 900 civilians were killed in an attempt to root out guerrilla fighters. December 11th, 1994. The picture you see here is Boris Yeltsin. He was the president of Russia following the collapse of the USSR. Some people kind of like him. Some people think he is a pudgy, little, ineffective, cute little guy who fumbled Russia's economic transition out of communism following the fall of the Soviet state. Well, on this day in 1994, this was the start of the First Chechen War, and Yeltsin orders Russian troops into Chechnya. December 11th, 2005, the Cronulla riots. This happened in a suburb of the city of Sydney, Australia. A week prior to this, there had been an altercation between some lifeguards at the beach and some Middle Eastern men from the nation of Lebanon. In response to this, exactly a week later, the following Sunday, a group of native Australians went out for a political demonstration to speak out against anti-white violence. 5,000 people gathered, nobody died, 104 people were arrested. December 11th, 2006, this photo is former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And on this day, he hosted in his capital city the International Conference to Review the Global Vision of the Holocaust. Stated purpose of this conference was neither to confirm nor deny the Holocaust, but to provide a safe space for academics to voice whatever concerns they had about it. The event was attended by David Duke, Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard, as well as a number of people who had gotten into legal trouble in European nations that have laws about Holocaust denial. The event also featured a Draw the Holocaust art contest, which was almost certainly a nod at Charlie Hebdo. That's the publication in France that notoriously ran drawings of the Prophet Muhammad. By the way, the same office building that got shot up by a terrorist in 2015. But just, how have I never heard about this? This is such a talented troll that I gotta respect this guy. Obvious publicity stunt to get under the skin of the Israelis, and December 11th, 2009, Angry Birds hits the App Store. You kinda have to have been around at the time to appreciate the milestone that this was for mobile gaming. December 11th, 2020, the FDA, that's the American Food Drug Administration, issues an emergency use authorization for the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. Thus, millions of people were injected with an experimental substance, and often coerced into doing so by their employer.